Welcome to my GR320 final presentation on the city of Manila in the Philippines and the effects of continued occupation by foreign actors on the city and country overall. So Manila has had a pretty turbulent path to independence. It was originally a Spanish colony through the 16th century. It was an important trading route to the Spanish and would eventually become a crucial battleground in the 1898 Spanish-American War, during which there was a conflict in the Manila Bay, and the U.S. government was actually ceded control by the Spanish without the consideration of the Filipinos who had been helping the U.S. during the war. The U.S. ended up having a brief conflict with the local Filipinos until 1902, when the U.S. government took full control. During this period, the U.S. controlled most of the government action within the country until 1935, when there was a promise of independence to the Filipino people. This was interrupted, though, during the World War II, when in 1941 Japan invaded and took control over the Philippines. And finally, in 1946, the Filipinos were granted some kind of autonomy. So, one of the interesting facts about the Philippines is that it's actually one of the oldest Chinatowns in the world. Binondo, which has a population of 12,000, was established shortly after Spanish arrival. And Chinese had been moving to the Philippines during this period for economic and cultural freedom. And the Spanish recognized that they would be extremely crucial in the trade possibilities for the area. They did, however, experience problems with piracy from the Chinese population. And the Spanish ended up moving many of the Christian Chinese into the current location of the Chinatown within Manila. One of the major impacts within the city of Manila was the Grand Plan for Manila during the early 20th century, instituted by the United States after they brought in Daniel Burnham, the famous architect and planner, who had a hand in building Chicago. What this looked like was a model city that would be created without the chains of voter support needed within municipalities in the United States. This was without any consideration for the local Filipino people, and in fact, there was minimal input from the government on what the actual plan would look like. In fact, Burnham's plan was approved within 3 days of being received by the Filipino government. Minimal amounts of the infrastructure that was planned in Burnham's development actually ended up taking place. There was actually none of the massive monumental buildings created that he had planned. But however, some of this can be seen in Roxas Avenue, this giant open seaway on the side of the city, as well as Luneta Park, which have some of his monumental architecture that was originally intended for the entire city. He did, however, have the opportunity to largely build Baguio, which was the summer capital for the Philippines, and this was a complete ground-up build with solely Burnham's design in mind. Later in the 20th century, the Filipino government did get the opportunity to start to recreate and redefine what the city of Manila would look like. Instead of the original jumbled and separated municipalities, the Metro Manila department was created under presidential decree, and this was formed as and chaired by local mayors and to direct the organization, and looked to bring a better and more cohesive plan to the city of Manila for the people. Manila does face modern problems. It is a fairly wet city, and they are pumping groundwater out at pretty rapid rates to provide for the locals. One of the major issues here is that there's a magnification of bad policy decisions. Instead of trying to address kind of the core concerns, they end up doing things like raising roads to keep the water off of them. And this forces locals into situations such as pouring concrete within their homes, and in some cases leaving sinks at the level of the knee from slowly bringing the living surfaces up to the roadway levels. There's also a large issue with a war on drugs currently occurring, mental health concerns, and corruption. Currently, 14% of the disabled population in Manila is suffering from mental health issues. And even with recent laws being passed to provide better mental health, the problem is that with the infrastructure in the country, it's still inaccessible to a large percentage of even the Metro Manila population. The current state right now, they are having a renewed relationship with the Chinese, who have been offering over 500,000 doses of coronavirus vaccine to the region. The IMF is also heavily involved, pushing for massive infrastructure projects. You can see by the graph on the right that their spending in import-export infrastructure has just continued to grow over the last few years. Public press and activism has continued to be an issue in Manila, and the recent C-19 law passed by President Duterte says that it looks to curb misinformation. However, all this has really been done is used as a tool to suppress media and any type of denunciation of government affairs and actions. And that is my presentation, and please post any questions if there are.